American families have been falling out of the middle class in record numbers. The combination of lost jobs and millions of foreclosures means a lot of folks are homeless and hungry for the first time in their lives. The government considers a family of four to be impoverished if they take in less than $22,000 a year. Based on that standard and government projections of unemployment, it is estimated the poverty rate for kids in this country will soon hit 25%. Those children would be the largest American generation to be raised in hard times since the Great Depression.
A lot of people look at me and they judge me just by looking at me like, okay, well, she has a job. You know, her kids look very well taken care of. Why would she need any help at all?
Because by official standards, she and her daughters live in poverty. Her job as a certified medical assistant pays just over $19,000 a year and offers no benefits, gets food stamps, and a government subsidy to pay for childcare she could never otherwise afford.
I live paycheck to paycheck, so I'm constantly worrying.
This is Good in the Hood podcast. Our conversation today is with Sean Morrison, the Executive Director of Good in the Hood and Senior Pastor of Cedar Crest Free Methodist Church.
Well, Sean, we're talking about poverty today, and I want to know a little bit more about Christians and poverty, or the church and poverty. You know, Jesus mentioned the poor 407 times, so you'd think that the poor are very, very important to him. And yet, so often, the church doesn't necessarily talk a lot about the poor on Sundays. So how many people do you think are church people that are served by Good in the Hood and some of the programs that you serve as far as food is concerned?
You are right. The poor are on the center of God's heart. Those who are marginalized and victims of whatever circumstance. And we think of victims, but being poor can be a victimization thing as well. And he went to the center of, where people were hurting and said to go and bind up those who were broken, to go and heal them. He went to leper camps. He went to people that were caught in places that we would call that are sinful. That's the one thing that I think Good in the Hood tries to embrace, that heart of God in what we do in practical ways. In regard to your question, how many of the poor are church people? I don't know a specific number, but I can say this: about half of our volunteers are recipients of services, which would indicate they're poor. And I can estimate that at least half of them are from a church. And so it's a significant number. I don't know that percentage, but I don't see that there's a distinctive between whether they go to church or not. People in general are suffering and are struggling, and sometimes it's situational poverty where they went through a crisis. Suddenly they were caught in poverty and they weren't expecting it, and that can be pretty critical because they don't know the rules of the street. They don't know how to access food shelves, and no one ever taught them that. They don't know how to deal with public transportation maybe. And then there's generational poverty where somebody has been in poverty, their parents and their grandparents, maybe at least 2 generations deep. Those who are in generational poverty, they're going to have a mindset that is more about in the moment, less about planning ahead. We're working with both groups, but we have to work with them differently, and we have to come around them differently. And those in situational poverty often were ones that were giving the food shelves in the past, or they were giving to places that were serving the poor, and now they're recipients, and so they are really uncomfortable and maybe won't access them. They're embarrassed to do so. And it's hard, so we have to create dignity around these means of helping people, means of offering mercy.
I like that idea of dignity. The reason I ask that question is because if, say, for example, 10% of any church is below the poverty level or are using, say, for example, food shelves, it should be a concern for the leadership of that church to be aware of the fact that a lot of their constituents are in this kind of situation. As a pastor, how do you deal with it? I mean, do you talk about poverty occasionally or quite often?
I think churches do want to make a difference. Sometimes they don't know how, or they're not aware of the situation. And in many ways, it's because there is somewhat of an embarrassment, a shame that people feel, so they don't share what they're really going through. They go to other places. They might go outside their community to get the food or the help they need. But when the church does know about it, sometimes they don't know what to do. I'll never forget a time when it was around the holidays, and this was prior to us having a food program of any sort or any real practical resources. A man and his daughter, who was pregnant, came to our church, and it was a cold day, and they drove up and knocked on the church door. I opened the door, invited them in, and the gal said that they were living in their car, and did I have any food for them? And I felt helpless. I didn't have answers for them. I didn't know what to tell them. It felt to me like Joseph and Mary came to my door, and I told them there was no room at the inn. And I'll tell you, it was convicting. And I sat there and after I did the best I could to help them and gave them resources and gave them I gave them some gas money and some food and what I had. But I just felt literally like my hands were tied behind my back because I was not prepared for it. I think a lot of churches are that way. For me, the church really wants to do good, but often doesn't have the means or the know-how. And so it's not enough just to have compassion. We need to have wisdom with that compassion. And the wisdom needs to lead it, actually, because if we lead it with compassion, we'll only have compassion that is practical as long as we have resources. But if we have wisdom, we'll know how to sustain our compassion in a manner that will hopefully do not only instant good, but it'll do something that will be able to have some perpetuity to it.
You have such a great organization with Good in the Hood. Do pastors or church leaders come to you and ask you for either assistance in how to help people in their area, or they just want to know more, like your experience? You had experienced a father and a daughter who were really in grave need. And so we need to be able to be prepared for that. What do you tell those Christian leaders?
Well, one of the things I try to do is, first of all, understand what they're dealing with. Is this an anomaly, or is this the regular thing they're dealing with? Because we don't want to create a ministry around an exception. You, of course, deal with that personally as much as you can. But if there's a consistent thing that's going on that they're dealing with, an area where there's really vulnerability, then I said, you got to create your outreach identity. I said, and you can't do everything, but what is that thing you're going to do? So for our church, we realized our outreach identity, we were a servant-oriented church, and no one was really doing food from a church perspective. There was a food hunger relief program, a social organization, but not a church one. So we created a new mission statement. We said, we're feeding bodies, we're feeding souls. We're going to do really one thing. We're going to make sure we feed. And that one thing has opened up great opportunities. People, it hasn't made our church triple in size, but it's doubled in size, and it's done well. And we've got people now that are from the food program that are coming and become part of our church, and they're contributing members. The interesting thing we did, though, before we got into that, is we challenged our church. We said two things. We said, what would it look like if you stopped praying for yourself for 1 month and prayed only for people outside yourself? I said, fast yourself. I said, a good reason maybe we don't get very many answers to prayer is so many people are praying for themselves, and God's not interested in helping us become more self-centered. I said, the second thing is, would you eat the food that you're serving others? I said, so I would challenge you, church, to eat only food off the food shelf for 1 month. And whatever you save from your grocery bill, contribute that back to our food shelf. And let's see what happens. And then the third thing we did was we created a 911 program. This is the very beginning. And I said, we asked the church, what would it look like if we sponsored 9 families with 1 week's worth of groceries per month for 1 year? 911. So what would that look like? And I said, that turned the church around. And 911 lasted about 30 days. Then it was 20 families. And about 3 months later, it was 50 families. And now it's 400 to 500 families.
Isn't that incredible? And Good in the Hood feeds about 3,000 people per month. But you have a program where you can help people by the same kind of numbers. It's a 10-4-1 number, 10-4-1. And I think it's an ingenious way of getting people to be aware of poverty and the need that there is in their community. Tell us about 10-4-1.
It's very simple, and you're right, it works well for us. We take $10, and if we can get 1,000 donors to give $10 a month, that would pay for all the groceries for those 3,000 people every month, which is over 36,000 people a year. And that would give us the means to do it. So $10 a month feeds 4 people with up to 7 days worth of essential groceries. And that's the cost of groceries. That's not all the administrative costs, but we operate very lean. We don't own any buildings. And so a lot of that are the dollars we get by donation go right to the end user. And so we're very excited that we're looking for 1,000 monthly donors to give $10 each month.
Well, it's called 10-4-1. So Sean, where do they learn more about 10-4-1? Either more information about the program or how to sign up to do it.
www.goodinthehood.org. And they can go to our website, visit there, and it gives information about that. People can become partners, and they can become volunteers with us and do a number of other things. And the website will bring that out pretty clearly.
Well, we hope more people will remember 10-4-1 and remember what it stands for and become a part of helping people who are in need.
Helping others and changing lives is at the heart of Good in the Hood. If you'd like to know more about this value-driven organization, please visit goodinthehood.org.